War is a contest of steel, of economies, of ideologies. It is fought with artillery that speaks in thunder, and with tanks that grind nations to dust. We measure its progress in kilometers of captured ground and in the grim arithmetic of casualty lists. But beneath this avalanche of steel, there is a quieter, more fundamental battlefield: the human mind. It is here, in the landscape of belief and despair, of loyalty and disillusionment, that the most decisive victories are often won, long before the final shots are fired. What if the most powerful weapon ever deployed was not a bomb that could level a city, but a simple, undeniable truth that could level an army's will to fight? What if the key to unlocking a soldier's obedience was not a threat, but a promise? This is the story of how, in the final, brutal months of the Second World War, a single piece of paper, repeated and refined by the millions, became a weapon so potent it convinced over 1 million battle-hardened soldiers to lay down their arms. It is the story of a secret war of words, of psychology turned into a weapon system, and of how, at the moment of maximum despair, the truth became the ultimate weapon. Our story starts not in the halls of power, nor in the strategic planning rooms of generals, but in the mud and the snow of a collapsing front, with a man who had lost everything but the words in his diary. December 1944. A German officer, his name lost to history, scribbles in his journal amidst the carnage of the Battle of the Bulge. His hand is stiff from the cold, his mind numb from the constant shelling. His words are not those of a fanatic, but of a man consumed by the cold, hard mathematics of destruction. "I have no hope left," he writes. "We are told of victory, but we see only death. The skies belong to the enemy. Their fighter bombers, the Yabos, circle us like vultures, and we have nothing to send up against them. The roads belong to the enemy. Their supply trucks move in endless columns while our panzers run dry. Soon the very ground beneath our feet will belong to them. We are ghosts, fighting a war that is already over. We are ordered to die for a cause that is already lost." This officer was not alone. By the winter of 1944, the German war machine, once the terror of Europe, was breaking. For years it had been fueled by a potent mixture of national pride, the momentum of early victories, and the hypnotic, messianic promises of its leadership. But now that fuel was running dangerously, catastrophically low. The problem for the German High Command was a simple, brutal, and inescapable one: reality. On the Eastern Front, the catastrophe of Operation Bagration during the summer had resulted in the complete annihilation of Army Group Center. The Soviet juggernaut was now a relentless, grinding tidal wave of men and machines that had pushed the Wehrmacht back to the very borders of the Reich. German generals spoke in hushed, terrified tones of the Soviet deep battle doctrine, a symphony of artillery, armor, and infantry that didn't just break their lines, but swallowed entire armies whole. Over 400,000 German soldiers were killed or captured in that single offensive, a loss from which the Ostheer would never recover. In the West, the D-Day landings had torn a hole in Fortress Europe that could not be stitched shut. The breakout from Normandy, Operation Cobra, had unleashed Patton's Third Army in a devastating blitz across France. This was followed by the horror of the Falaise Pocket, a cauldron of fire and steel so awful that soldiers who witnessed it called it the corridor of death. An Allied officer flying over the scene described it as looking like a landscape on the moon, littered with the black, smoking hulks of German armor for as far as the eye could see. And then there were the skies. The German soldier had a name for the feeling of utter helplessness he felt as he stared at the heavens. Luftterror, terror from the air. A storm of aluminum and explosives rained down on German cities day and night, crippling production and shattering the morale of the home front. The numbers told a story of impending doom that no amount of propaganda could conceal. By late 1944, for every one German aircraft produced, the Allies were building 10. For every ton of supplies reaching the front lines, the Allies delivered 50. It was an industrial sledgehammer that no amount of fighting spirit could withstand. A German soldier named Hans, interviewed after his capture, tried to explain this feeling. We would lie in our foxholes and watch the American bombers fly over. Not in dozens or even hundreds. They came in thousands, a river of silver in the sky, so many that they blocked out the sun. And we had nothing to send up against them. We could only watch and wait for the earth to shake. The propaganda told us of new wonder weapons, of a turning tide. But our eyes told us the truth. Our eyes told us we were finished. The Nazi propaganda machine, once a master of illusion under Joseph Goebbels, was now fighting a losing battle against a tide of verifiable, lived experience. Goebbels could speak of glorious last stands, but the soldiers on the front lines saw a different story. They saw the dwindling rations, the worn-out boots, the hollow-eyed replacements who were too young or too old to be fighting. They saw an army bleeding to death. But the Allies faced their own complex problem. How do you convince an army, still bound by an oath of loyalty and gripped by a paralyzing fear of its own leadership, to stop fighting? How do you break the spell of a totalitarian regime that punished not only the surrendering soldier with death, but also his family back home through the terrifying law of Sippenhaft, or kin liability? The answer would come not from a general drawing lines on a map, but from a team of psychologists, historians, advertising executives, and artists working in secret. Enter the Psychological Warfare Division of the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, or PWD/SHAEF. It was a unique unit, a joint Anglo-American effort tasked with the immense challenge of waging war on the German mind itself. Headed by the energetic U.S. Brigadier General Robert A. McClure, its ranks were filled with an eclectic, almost eccentric mix of talent. There were advertising executives from Madison Avenue like William S. Paley, the visionary head of the CBS radio network, who understood how to sell an idea to a mass audience. There were influential journalists like C.D. Jackson of Time Life magazine, who knew how to craft a compelling narrative. There were professors from Ivy League universities, historians, and crucially, German expatriates and prisoners of war who understood the nuances of the language, the culture, and the psychology of the soldier they were trying to reach. This team studied their enemy with academic rigor. They read Hitler's own words in Mein Kampf, where he praised the effectiveness of British propaganda in World War I, which he believed had corroded the German will to fight from within. The PWD planners were determined to turn that same weapon back on the Nazis, but with a crucial, powerful refinement. Their core principle was radical in its simplicity, yet profound in its implications. Absolute, verifiable truth would be their primary ammunition. They understood that traditional boastful propaganda, our bombs are bigger, our soldiers are stronger, would be immediately dismissed by a cynical and battle-wearied German soldier. Instead, they would operate on a philosophy of credibility. They would not promise a fantasy. They would offer a fact. They would not sell an ideology. They would offer an escape. Their weapon would not be a lie, but a promise backed by the full faith and credit of the Allied war machine. The ultimate result of their work was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a leaflet that would become ubiquitous on the battlefields of Western Europe, a document known to the German soldier simply as the Passierschein,
or passcode. This was not a crude piece of paper. It was meticulously designed to look and feel official, to mimic a legal document that a German soldier, raised in a culture of rules and regulations, would instinctively respect. Printed on high-quality paper, the early versions featured the official seals of the United States and the British Empire. The text, in both flawless German and English, was stark, direct, and devoid of insulting language. It was not an appeal to desertion. It was a formal guarantee.
Safe conduct. The German soldier who carries this safe conduct is using it as a sign of his genuine wish to surrender. He is to be disarmed, to be well looked after, to receive food and medical attention as required, and to be removed from the danger zone as soon as possible. And below this powerful, life-altering promise was the signature of the one man every German soldier knew was in charge of the Allied armies in the West, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. This was the core of the strategy, a promise of life backed by the highest authority. The leaflet didn't ask the soldier to betray his country or his comrades. It simply offered him a rational, officially sanctioned alternative to a pointless death on a lost battlefield. It was, in effect, a legal contract for survival. But creating the perfect message, forging this paper bullet, was only half the battle. Now they had to deliver it on a scale never before imagined. And that required turning the very tools of destruction into messengers of hope. The challenge was immense. How do you get millions of these documents into the hands of enemy soldiers across a vast and heavily defended front? The answer was a relentless, technologically sophisticated campaign of what came to be known as aluminum rain. The Allies developed ingenious methods of delivery. Leaflets were carefully rolled and packed into 105mm artillery smoke shells. Artillery crews accustomed to firing high explosives were now tasked with firing shells that would burst in the air over enemy lines, scattering their paper cargo into trenches, foxholes, and dugouts. A forward observer might call in a fire mission not to destroy a machine gun nest, but to deliver the mail. For deeper penetration, they designed specialized leaflet bombs. The most common was the M16A1, a simple cardboard container that could be packed with tens of thousands of leaflets. Dropped from high-altitude bombers, a time fuse would detonate a small charge, blowing the container apart and releasing a blizzard of paper that would flutter down over a wide area. But the true workhorse of this operation was often the rugged Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Known affectionately by its pilots as the Jug, this fighter bomber was a beast of an aircraft, capable of carrying a heavy payload and withstanding tremendous punishment. Pilots on leaflet missions, nicknamed Paperboys, would fly low and fast over enemy territory, braving flak and enemy fighters. But instead of bombs or rockets, their wings were loaded with leaflet containers. One P-47 pilot, Edwin Cottrell of the 493rd Fighter Squadron, recalled the surreal nature of these missions. One day you're dropping 500-pound bombs on a railway bridge. The next, you're dropping paper. It felt strange, not blowing things up. But we were told it was just as important, that we were fighting for their minds. We'd go in at treetop level, pop up over a German position, and just unload these paper bombs. You could see the leaflets fluttering everywhere. It was like a ticker-tape parade in the middle of a battle. The sheer scale of this operation is difficult to comprehend. In the final year of the war, from D-Day to VE Day, the Allies dropped an estimated 6 billion leaflets over Western Europe. It was a constant, inescapable whisper in the ear of the German soldier, a paper storm that never ceased. For a soldier like Klaus, a 19-year-old grenadier huddled in a frozen foxhole in the Hürtgen Forest, the arrival of these leaflets was a profound and dangerous event. He continued, they would come at night. First, you'd hear the drone of the planes, what we called the mail run.
Then a soft rustling sound like leaves falling in autumn. In the morning, they would be everywhere, caught in the barbed wire, half buried in the snow, plastered against the wet tree trunks. We were forbidden to touch them. Our sergeant told us he would shoot any man caught reading one. Our officers called it find propaganda, enemy lies. He continued, but we all did it. When no one was looking, you would snatch one up, fold it quickly and hide it in your pocket, inside your tunic. You'd read it in secret, in the dark of a bunker, with a small flashlight. That little piece of paper, it was a dangerous thing to have. If a Feldgendarm found it on you, you were a dead man. But it was also a little piece of hope. It told you there was another way out of the forest, a way that didn't end with a grave. The German High Command was not blind to this insidious threat. They recognized the poison in these paper promises and fought back with everything they had. The Nazi regime responded with institutional fury. Orders were reinforced down the chain of command. Any soldier caught with an Allied leaflet would be summarily executed for treason and displaying a defeatist attitude. Propaganda posters appeared, depicting surrendering soldiers as weak-willed cowards who had condemned their families back home to shame and retribution under the Sippenhaft law. They tried to build a psychological wall of fear to counter the Allied message of hope. But the PWD-SHEF was a learning organization, relentless and adaptive. They were constantly gathering intelligence, interviewing new prisoners of war in their interrogation cages to refine their methods. These interviews were psychological gold mines. They learned, for example, that many German soldiers were skeptical of Eisenhower's looping handwritten signature, believing it could be easily faked. So the PWD started printing his name in clear, authoritative block letters directly beneath the signature. They discovered that the original green leaflets were too easily lost in the foliage of the French countryside, so they changed the color to a more eye-catching signal red. They heard stories of soldiers wanting to surrender in groups, but being afraid that one leaflet wasn't enough, so they added a simple but brilliant line of text. This pass is valid for one or several bearers. They also diversified their portfolio of truth. Alongside the life-saving Passierschein, they began dropping a newspaper called Nachrichten für die Truppen, News for the Troops. Produced daily in London by a team of German journalists and prisoners of war who had turned against the Nazi regime, this newspaper was a masterclass in gray propaganda. It looked and read exactly like a German military newspaper, but its content was devastatingly effective. It contained real, verifiable news from the various fronts, information that was systematically suppressed by Goebbels' censors. The effect was corrosive to the last vestiges of German morale. A soldier could read an official communiqué from his own high command claiming a successful defensive action in the Aachen sector, and then read in Nachrichten für die Truppen that the city of Aachen had in fact fallen to the Americans 3 days ago. The paper would publish lists of high-ranking German officers who had recently been captured, proving that even generals were surrendering. It printed detailed maps showing the relentless Allied advances. It systematically dismantled the credibility of the Nazi regime, one verifiable, demoralizing fact at a time. But perhaps the most audacious operation was yet to come. It was a plan to turn the German postal service itself into an unwitting accomplice in its own downfall, a black propaganda mission of breathtaking ingenuity. It was called Operation Cornflakes. The name was chosen because the Allies hoped the propaganda would be delivered with the morning mail to be read over breakfast. The plan, masterminded by the OSS, the forerunner to the CIA, was simple as it was brilliant. The OSS meticulously studied the German postal system. They obtained German mailbags, learned the exact types of cancellation stamps used in different cities, and even got access to pre-war telephone directories to harvest thousands of legitimate German names and addresses. Then they began to forge mail. They created perfect replica envelopes with legitimate return addresses from German businesses. Inside these envelopes, they placed their propaganda, including copies of a fiercely anti-Nazi newspaper called Das Neue Deutschland, the New Germany. The delivery method was pure psychological genius. Allied fighter bombers would locate and attack German mail trains. Then, in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, as smoke billowed from the wreckage, a second wave of planes would swoop in low and fast and drop mail bags filled with the forged letters into the chaos. The assumption was that when German postal workers arrived to clean up the site, they would collect the fake mail along with the real and deliver it through the official system, none the wiser. The first mission of Operation Cornflakes took place on January 5, 1945, against a mail train near Linz. It was a stunning success. Over the next 3 months, more than 20 missions were flown, successfully delivering over 320 mailbags containing hundreds of thousands of pieces of propaganda directly into the German homeland, courtesy of the Deutsche Reichspost. Post-war interrogations of Gestapo officials revealed that the operation caused widespread confusion and paranoia, forcing them to launch numerous investigations into a non-existent internal resistance movement they believed was infiltrating the mail. It was the ultimate expression of the PWD-SHEF's philosophy, using the enemy's own systems against them, armed with nothing more than the truth, cleverly disguised.
In the final accounting of war, we measure the cost in tons of steel and in acres of shattered cities. We count the dead, and we mourn the lost generations. But the story of the leaflet that disarmed an army reminds us that the most significant battles are often invisible. They are fought not on the beaches or in the forests, but in the quiet, desperate trenches of the human soul, where despair wages its final war against hope. And in that war, a single simple truth, delivered on a slip of paper and carried by the wind, can be the one weapon that brings the fighting to an end and allows the silence and the future to finally return.